we'll go ahead and get started for right now. And as we're actually getting ready to start this live stream, I want to start off with just, a brief introduction as well as some housekeeping rules, guidelines, more or less, for us to follow for this time to run smoothly. So we have a few things. We have the Q&A function, which if at any point during this live stream, you have a question that pops into your head, which, let's be honest, more than likely will happen. This is going to be obviously very engaging with Peter. Throw it into the Q&A. And at the end, we will have a dedicated time to actually answer these questions. If some of these questions might be answered during the actual live stream, things such as that. But if you have dedicated questions, you can throw it down into the question and answer kind of functionality on this live stream, as well as you all have seen, you can throw that into the chat as well. The chat will work. We will have kind of people from our team watching the chat and letting us know if there's anything on the back end that we would like to answer, things such as that. And one part that we find super important when talking with you all and doing a live stream about the future of work is we want this to be engaging and super lively. As we all know, in this kind of exciting time, there's no reason to be, quiet about it. You want to say what you're thinking. We want to know what you're thinking. So at any point, throw things into the chat. Let us know how you're feeling. Are you scared? Are you excited? Whatever it may be. Any thoughts like you have around what we're saying, we want to hear from you. And then on top of that, a quick introduction for me. So my name is Austin Braham. I am the AI evangelist here at Integral, and I have the absolute pleasure of actually introducing you to our guest today. So we have this truly special guest who is someone that has been at the forefront of shaping the AI landscape for over a decade, Peter Guagenti, who is our new CEO at Integral. He is a serial entrepreneur, a growth expert, and visionary who has played pivotal roles in the success of multiple companies. Through Peter's extensive experience, including leading marketing and product strategy at innovative organizations such as Cockroach Labs, Single Store, and Tab9, he drove the adoption of cutting-edge technologies. He is also sought after for an advisor at Forbes, and his insights are always sharing and rapidly evolving in the world of AI. So in today's actual fireside chat with Peter, we will hear his vision of the future of work and how AI will revolutionize the way that we all do business and operate. We'll discuss the challenges, the opportunities that companies face in this new era, and explore how AI agents are letting us actually transform the way that work is done. So without further ado, let's dive into our discussion with Integral's CEO, Peter Guagenti. Peter, thanks for joining us. Let's dive straight into the first question for everybody. So it's quite obvious. AI agents / AI workers, whatever you want to call them, they're here. Everyone's talking about them. They're kind of the hottest thing going on in AI right now. Can you just tell us and break down an easily digestible way we can distinguish between co-pilots, like normal co-pilots, and AI agents or AI workers?
That's a great question, Austin, and thank you all for joining. I appreciate you taking the time. I have some perspective to share. I don't know if I know all of the things, but I'll do my best to share what I've seen. So we've been on this really interesting journey with AI. So I've been an investor and advisor to AI companies for close to a decade now, starting out with machine learning and deep learning. I built products even prior to that were all algorithmically centered, and so the role of AI, I think, has been emerging actually for some time, right? We've had enough tests over the last decade of where and how algorithmic decision making could come in, and where we could do, instead of robotic automation, which I think we've obviously been able to do for 20, 30 years now, where we could have real decision making and automation. And what's been really amazing to me is in the last 3 years, we've seen this sort of radical transformation. When the LLMs first emerged, 5-6 years ago, we started targeting them at these sort of co-pilot use cases. And with the emergence of ChatGPT, I think it really entered the public consciousness that you could actually interact with an LLM and have it be a helping hand for you. I spent actually the last year and a half before being at Integrail at a company called Tab9, which is the originator of the AI code assistant category. And that was a choice, actually. I knew the rest of my career was going to be in AI. And AI was amazing at software development before it was amazing at anything else. Like, LLMs were really good at structured, predictable languages, and what was more structured and predictable than code, right? Before the English language was. So what I got to see there is something that we've now seen in almost every other function that uses AI, where first the chat interfaces became this productivity enhancer, right? Just being able to interact with the LLM and have it help you think through tasks and work through tasks, that sort of assistant era was really powerful, right? And all the way through these sort of so-called co-pilots, you hear everyone calls their sort of peer and partner that you work with a co-pilot, and it's really powerful, right? I mean, you think about in software development, co-pilots have introduced something like 50-60% productivity gains just being able to code with you. In customer support, you're seeing support ticket resolution closed in very similar times, 50% faster ticket, both response and close rates, even with a human in the loop, and so you're seeing real value in these things, but they are still human in the loop, right? I think that is part of it. So they are really, I think about it as like an Iron Man suit for the mind. Like they're helping you be more successful at the tasks you already want to do. The other thing that the assistants don't have is memory, right? The assistants don't know all of your corporate knowledge and know exactly what you mean by the things you're saying. That's been increasing over time, but they're intended as an interaction model. Agents really started emerging as a way to package the prompts you would normally put into an assistant, the knowledge that's required to complete the task, right? Predictably attaching that knowledge required to complete the task, and then the actions and workflow required to work autonomously. And trying to define AI agents sort of funny right now, because it's almost like trying to define application, right? I mean, there's the cute little app on your phone that's your note-taking app, and then there's Netflix, right? Those are both software applications, right? AI agents take sort of a similar shape, and I'd argue that AI agents really are, in many ways, the real applications of AI. And so we're moving very quickly through this era of, first those co-pilots. Now we're adding these agents that can autonomously complete discrete tasks, but then the ability to have these agents interact and actually work with each other, or agents that go through a variety of workflows, in their own path, are emerging now, what we've been calling internally AI workers, right? And you hear Mark Benioff talking about this around a future digital workforce. I think you're hearing others starting to say this. It is here, right? I mean, there are absolutely discrete tasks, workflows, roles. Think about things you've been doing in the back office with entry-level personnel for the last 20 years that absolutely AI can fully create. And if you can imagine designing a process and delegating a task to a human, giving them the context they need to do the job, giving them the structure to be able to make decisions throughout the way, and then sort of defined inputs and defined outputs. If you can design that as a business person, then you can create an AI worker. You absolutely can.
Absolutely. I think that's super important. Danielle threw in the chat, I thought this was really funny. Almost like AIs work well with computers because it is a computer. So I love that, Danielle. That's funny.
There's this phrasing that's emerged in some of the discussion right now, which really resonates with me, which is services as software. We've been living in this world of sort of software as a service. We create software that you can just consume and it does specific things. And that's been amazing for us. Like 20, 30, 50% productivity gains from various SaaS tools over the last 20 years have been wonderful. But now what we're really seeing is being able to take services that a human would do and turn them into software, right? That then executes on its own. And particularly, I think to Danielle's comment in the chat about, navigating multiple computer systems, right? It interacts with these applications just like a human would. So you absolutely can unleash it on a number of applications and it'll do it incredibly well.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's most people are thinking about right now is the idea of how is this going to actually affect me, like on a day-to-day. So how would you say that AI workers / AI agents, whatever we want to call them, are actually, allowing the reshaping of business today? And maybe from the standpoint of like on a personal level, how would you see it's going to affect that?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and it very much comes down to what your role in an organization is, and what the things you're trying to achieve are. You know, what department you're in, what function you're in, et cetera. But there are some universal truths. So there's been a ton of research about where are people attempting to use AI, what are they hoping to achieve from it, and where are they seeing value. And the surveys all agree that both the perception of AI and where it's delivering value today is correct, which is in two realms. The first is just straight up cost savings, right? There are things that we have been doing through either manual process or lightly automated sort of robotic if this then that we have massive opportunity with LLMs to actually go and automate and autonomously complete more and more of that. That has fundamental transformation impact on the profitability of a business, the pace at which a business can move, and the capabilities you can deliver. The other side of it, though, is being able to do things that you were never able to do before, either because you couldn't create it with software, or you couldn't hire for it because either you were not able to attract that talent or you couldn't afford that talent, or accomplish things that are really complex. And so I'll give you some examples of both of those. So one of the customers we work with is a software company that has a part of their back office. In order to feed the data set for what they do contract ingest. So they actually go and ingest hundreds or thousands of contracts from a customer that they then have to rationalize, organize the data, and then deploy that out into the rest of their application for usage by their customer and then to optimize spend. That has been not something you could ever automate, even with image recognition and data scraping. These are human documents, right? So they're human documents they're created by humans and read by humans. So you can't extract that data. And so they've had a back office function that has been doing this for quite a while, and it's very expensive. You know, the cost per contract ingested is enough that it does hurt their fundamental profitability. And so there's this question around whether or not they can be profitable as a business because of that, right? And so they've been able to take that work that this contract team in an offshore location is doing and completely automate it with AI, right? And we've seen that story, by the way, at probably a half a dozen customers where they're taking these back office functions. They've been limited by the technology to date, but LLMs read documents like humans do. So if you can coach them what they're looking for and what they need to do with it, and literally the prompt engineering around this looks like you're talking to a person, right? Give them descriptions, help them understand how to think through the problem, just like you would coach a junior employee. They've been able to do that. And so the cost savings are dramatic. And it's not like, oh, it's saved 10%, 20%. I mean, like 90% reduction in the staff doing a task. Right. And maybe even more, right? When we talk about AI being a 10x productivity gain, it's not a joke. Like we've already seen this in the earliest adoption of these AI workers. What does that then unlock for you? The capability side is all of a sudden where things start to come into play. Imagine though you had a business, and I'd imagine a lot of the people on this live stream are managers or business owners, or they run a department or a function. Like there are things you've probably wanted to do as a business and you have not been able to do it. Like your imagination is not the constraining factor. The technology has been, or your budget is, you can't hire staff. We're seeing people now building AI workers that complete things that they weren't able to do before, like simply couldn't do before. And, they're able to add new capabilities and new offerings in what they're doing. We work with a wealth management firm, for example. They've created a chatbot that actually is based on their ingest of all of the financial reporting of all of the investments that a single customer has. So, imagine you're a high net worth individual. You don't just have, normal stocks and bonds and positions that you can see in your UI. You've got alternative investments. You've got VC funds. You've got private equity. You've got all these other things. They all issue reporting about their performance all in very different ways. And so in order to even understand what's happening across to look for macro trends, somebody would actually literally have to read all of it and then interpret that and pass it on. So nobody does it, right? People just read it on their own and they make that choice. they've ingested all that, put it in a form where they can interact with that content. And so it's almost like having somebody who is an advanced analyst who understands the macro trends and then also understands what's happening with your portfolio specifically and is able to have a conversation with you about it. That's a new capability. That's not something we were able to really do before, except in very specialized use cases, right? And so both of these worlds are now emerging. So, as I think about this, the impact of this for the people on the live stream, like think about if you're a manager and all of a sudden you could have 10 specialized roles who worked for you without changing your budget. Would you do that? Or if you're an entrepreneur and you've got a business, what if you wanted to add a capability that you simply couldn't do before because either it couldn't be coded or you couldn't afford the staff, like product source services? You can do that now, right? And so this is really radical, right? This is really radical. If you can imagine a role or a function that you would have within your team, either the way you want to operate or an offering you want to create, AI agents make that possible in a way that is hard for me to overstate.
Yeah, and just to throw in my own personal experience with this, lately has been for me on the marketing kind of content creator side of things. What like more or less, it's times of me just sitting here being like, man, what are the parts of content creation, video scripts, making thumbnails, making all these images or whatever. It just takes and for any of you that are in this, in this call right now of like, if you have to do that too, some of these things take a long time and it really bogs people down. And my world, that's what usually stops people is they're like, oh my gosh, it just takes too much time for me to do my job and then do this too. So even just the idea of like figuring out in your head or just looking at your business, what are these repetitive tasks like that can be automated and can be given to an agent? And in my case, it made a full social media agent that does almost everything for me, making an hour's work, go down into maybe a minute, which is obviously amazing. So I think this is where a lot of people are thinking about, Peter, right now. People are constantly asking me, I'm sure you way more so than me, is them just asking, what are these tasks and what are these workflows that these AI workers are best suited for? And I know it's, you just went over a lot of that, but it does, if you were to disperse it down into a super simple and quick, actionable, like almost like test that you can do with yourself, what would you say is the best way for them to find that?
Well, let me maybe frame what the LLMs are capable of, and that might actually help think it, because I do think the more and more I talk to executives, like I spend a lot of my time talking to executives and companies who were trying to adopt AI, and they're trying to figure out where and how to do it, and I feel like we're in what somebody described to me as the blank canvas problem of like, you're looking at this thing and you think what's possible, but looking at a blank canvas and saying, what the hell would I do with this? Like, is overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And I think it's okay to say it's overwhelming, because even as somebody who's been living in LLMs now for over 6 years, I invested in one of my first companies that I invested in AI was somebody trying to do the SDR AI problem now before the LLMs really were capable of it. Right. So, I've been living in this a while. And so even I struggle with that. But maybe the way I'd recommend you think about this is the LLM really is a brain, right? I know we talk about AGI and all these other things. I feel like that's all smoke and mirrors. The easier way of thinking about this is even a human has basically three structures in the brain. We have our lizard brain, so-called lizard brain. Any neuroscientist will rip me apart for describing it these ways. So this is like the normal person way of thinking about these things. So there's the sort of lizard brain that's all of our automatic functions, our breathing, our sex drive, our fight or flight instinct, all these sort of fundamental things, right? Then there's our monkey brain, right? The part that evolved to sort of use tools and create tools and live in the world, and that's a pattern matching brain. That's what it's really good at. Like, we see a face and we know that face. In fact, we're really good at just seeing faces, like, because that's something our pattern matching brain got good at. And then there's sort of the prefrontal cortex and more of our advanced reasoning, advanced thinking, and creativity comes from there, right? And creativity, I would always posit that sort of when I think about pattern matching versus creativity, I think they are two very different things. Like you can be creative by repeating patterns. Don't misinterpret. But real creativity tends to be radical and orthogonal. Like it tends to like break through patterns and be radically different, right? And the LLMs are good at that middle portion. They're good at that pattern matching brain, and they are a brain, right? Now they are a brain that knows nothing, right? They just know what they know, right? And they know how to think through a problem. And my analogy on this is actually where hallucination comes from. When you interact with an LLM, they don't hallucinate. They just try to give you an answer. It's almost like talking to a child, right? If you have kids, I've got older kids now, but when they were little, if I asked them something they didn't know, they would just make something up that sounded like based on the knowledge they had, right? And so, if you think about the LLM in that way and you think about it as like a brain that just needs coaching and guidance, then you start to really think about where you could point it at different problems. And the easiest way of thinking about this, if you're trying to figure out your first few use cases for AI, is for setting aside the assistant and copilot use case for a second, because those are pretty obvious, right? The agent use cases are more like, if you could define a process, if you could describe the outputs, the inputs and the outputs, and it was really clear, what it was you were asking for, so it was repeatable for lots of people, that is a good use case for an agent. I coach my customers all the time on, where do you have contract teams doing work? Where have you offshored a process to a consultancy? Where have you taken and created a sub team that all they do is a certain set of activities for you? If those things are so well described and so well defined that you could articulate that, guess what? That's a perfect candidate for an AI agent or AI worker to go and do that, which then gets back to the sort of capability or products or cost savings thing, right? Because if you're spending $60 an hour, $100 an hour for an offshore team to do something that you can now offshore to Silicon, like Silicon will do it a lot cheaper, right? And so, that's a massive cost savings. But then there are things we don't do because we could, we have it described, but it's too expensive for us to do it somewhere else. So we just don't do it, right? So to me, those are the areas that where I'd encourage you to think about it. Actually, I'm watching the chat while we're talking. Somebody just called me out for my brain things. 100%. I am not a neuroscientist. I'm just trying to make it understandable to the average person. So yes, feel free to criticize my language. I'm totally on board with that. There's another question that was put into the chat that I think builds on your question, Austin, around where and how to think about this, which is the organizational structures. Do we think the same corporate hierarchies play out? I don't actually. And I think that's part of it, because I think part of what AI agents allow us to do, we have these weird structures that we've built up where we have managers, that are there really just to keep other people in check, right? They're there just to like guide the work and make sure people are doing their job, or they're, their ways of checks and balances on things, and it's not creative work. I think the structure of our teams start to really change, where instead of having, creative people and individual contributors and then managers, you can be both. Like you can be somebody who is the creative person who's coming up with the idea, the strategy, they make the more radical decisions. And then you have an army of AI agents that actually go and bring your vision to life. There's a thesis among VCs right now around when will we see the first single employee $1 billion company, right? It's a radical thought, right? It's a thought starter more than a reality today. But I think it's an interesting one. Like if you think about your own organization and say, well, would I be structured this way if I knew I could take repeatable tasks and just know that they were going to get done? Would I look the same way? I don't think so. I think you end up elevating your people into more design, strategy, requirements, like bigger picture thinking, and know that their vision gets executed.
Yep. And I think this is where a lot of people are talking about right now, of this idea of, what is business ultimately going to look like now that AI workers are going to be, are starting to be implemented into the actual work. And I think this kind of leads like in the direction of, okay, if there are these AI workers and then there's me, and then there's just theoretically this new, kind of format or way that we are doing work, what is the best way for me as an individual contributor at a company to actually take all this information, create, find these processes that would be like a repeatable task or something that would do well for an agent. What is the way that I can think about my job and how I can interact well and actually do my job well and be future proof, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
In all.
Look, I'm going to say something blunt that I think a lot of people aren't saying, which is I think a lot of IC work is at risk of being replaced by AI, and I think you need to be honest with yourself about that. But this same thing has happened with every new technology. I lived through digital transformation. I literally dropped out of college to start my first digital agency in New York in '95 when half the people didn't even know what the hell the internet was. And so I lived through that, and I remember these same conversations around, oh my God, what's going to happen to my job? With all these things, emerging. And we saw it. Like, there were typing pools at companies in the late 90s to distribute memos, right? And then email emerged and text and broadcast and all these other things that we can do, right? There were, in financial services institutions, there were people who read handwritten applications and contracts and materials and typed them into back-end systems somewhere or just cataloged them. Those jobs are all gone, right? And so as an IC, I think the question you need to ask yourself is, what of my job is value add and what of it is repetitive, right? So what are the things I'm doing that are true value add, that is why you hired me, versus, what is just a repetitive process that I have to go through? And, you're in marketing as an evangelist. Like, marketing is a great example of that. I always talk about marketing as an iceberg, right? There's like this piece sticking up out of the water that's the idea and the creative and the positioning, but then there's all of this like sweat equity that goes into actually just bringing it to life, like all the creative production, the media planning, the distribution, all these other things. I think that view, you should really ask yourself, like, what if I managed a team? What if it wasn't just me as an IC? What would I do in my job every day if I could, instead of me having to do all this work, I could go and delegate it? What would that actually look like? And I think that's where the agents start to come in, right? And there's vertical agents that you can use off the shelf today. And then there are going to be bespoke agents that you have to build because there's a unique process or a unique method that you bring to bear that, frankly, is your value, right? Your process is your value, not the sitting on the factory assembly line is not the value. It's what your output is, and it's what your process is that's the value. So I'd encourage you as an individual contributor to start thinking, what if I had a team of 10, what would that team of 10 do? Right? Because what it does is it opens up the door for you to be in a position in your organization where you are now focused on where you add the greatest value to the business. And so, yeah. And ultimately what that means is, you've just basically got a promotion, right? You're now a leader of a team, even though that team is not made up of humans. I would challenge the leadership who's in the live stream and listening to start thinking that way too. Because I think the lazy way of looking at this is, well, I'm just going to fire some people. Like, okay, that's not really true. Like, that's not actually what you'll end up doing. Instead, you really want to be in a position of where you're thinking about how do you up level the output of your team, right? Because, is the reason you hired them the fact that they can, to keep beating your marketing use case, so that they know how to type out a LinkedIn post? I mean, come on, like, that's not why. It's like, because positioning and you know your audience and you know what's going to resonate. Like, even in software development, the space I was in, like, software engineers are not hired because they know how to write every line of code. I don't care if you're copy pasta out of an O'Reilly book or Stack Overflow. I hired you because I need you to design a system, right? And so, I think the managers need that viewpoint too of, where is the value add? Where do we go from here? Somebody in the chat said that their CEO is committed to having $100 million company with 6 employees. I totally believe it. If you look inside of most large organizations, I think even beyond 100 million is where you start to really see it. There are like small armies of people who do a function that they don't want to be doing that function. They want to be leading the work. They want to be doing more thoughtful work, but that exists because that's the way you have to get it done, right? So those small armies should become AI workers. That's exactly how we should be thinking about it. And you should be taking those people, if they were smart enough, to think that way, you should move them up. There was for those who are sci-fi nerds, I think it was Asimov who said in one of his books, as soon as you have a robot smart enough to do dishes, it's too smart to do dishes. right? And I feel like the way we've been operating in companies is we have a whole bunch of people who are kind of too smart for the job they're doing, right? But we needed them to do it. Well, guess what? Now the LLM is smart enough to do dishes. So let's let the LLM do the dishes while we go and cook the fine meal.
Yep. And I think this is actually, one thing that it's like as soon as DeepSeek kind of came out and obviously everyone freaked out and all that stuff, people, have been pointing out, and I feel like it really has to do with this, is Javon's paradox right now. Like the idea of like this increased efficiency, for some reason, people think that will lead to, you know, an increased consumption and getting rid of, they're going to only use agents, get rid of humans rather, but like it's going to now increase the human efficiency as well, which is going to keep like leveling up everybody. It's not going to be only AI agents, less humans. It's going to be more AI agents and more humans using those AI agents, and our efficiency is just going to keep going up and up. And I think that's where a lot of people are missing it right now, is they think all they're thinking about is, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my job? Rather than the idea of like these agents are gonna like level you up and like almost infinitely as it gets better and better.
Yeah, look, I talked to a lot of CEOs about this, and this it mirrors for me 100% of what we saw with digital transformation, right? And frankly, I was also in the birth of open source and cloud. I was at the forefront of a lot of these things, and the same conversation always occurs anytime something like this happens, where one CEO says, "Oh man, I'm going to slash my costs. I'm going to make so much more profit," and another CEO says, "I'm going to be able to slash a bunch of my expense in those things, and I'm going to go take that money and put it to being 10 times more competitive than the guy across the street." Who do you think actually wins? Who do you think actually wins? It's the person who says, wow, this new capability allows me to eliminate this thing as a low value function and invest more in this high value function. Those are the businesses that actually win. So, it's particularly for the leaders who are on this live stream, I'd encourage you. I've seen it. Like I saw it in almost every vertical when I was a management consultant for many years. I did digital transformation. I saw it in almost every one of those things. As somebody who spent time in advanced technology, I saw it with my customers. The ones who figured out how to unlock capability and go bigger is amazing. I think we're going to see the same exact thing with AI. I think you're going to see companies who've had some components of their spend going to things that ultimately were low value for both their customer and for them, right? They're going to be able to figure out how to delegate that to now AI workers, and then take their investments that they have and go bigger into more amazing and more interesting things and become better companies and offer better services and better products because of it. And if you're not thinking that way, then be careful, because there's probably going to be somebody alongside you who is going to reinvest, and they're going to eat your lunch eventually.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I think this is a great kind of segue into also less so now, very much so, let's say 2 years, 3 years prior, is the idea for these business leaders about ROI. Everything has, of course, been like, oh, you're not going to get any ROI by using AI. There's nothing actually there. How would you encourage business leaders to actually think about the very tangible ROI with these AI workers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think there is truth in the no ROI and the immediate ROI. There's truth in both. And as humans, we're terrible when two things that sound opposite to each other can be true at the same time. We're bad at that. So let's just acknowledge we're bad at that, and let's try to find our way through it. So, look, I'm going to tell you two staggering statistics. The early adoption of AI in the leaders who've been successful with it have seen radical return on investment, like radical. They've seen, 20, 30, 50, 80% productivity gains in functions that have deployed the technology, right? And so either improving their quality of service or in improving their capability or in reducing their cost. So the ROI is very clear, right? At the same time, however, there was a staggering statistic, and I apologize, I can't recall exactly who published this, but there was a staggering statistic for a measurement of the earliest AI projects that were executed, and over 80% of the first AI projects that companies were trying failed, just simply failed. And so I think that creates an interesting conflict for us to think about. Like when it's successful, it's massive, but when it's unsuccessful, it's just a massive expense, right? So I think the way I would encourage you to think about it is first and foremost, the business case has to be abundantly clear. Like, why would you be moving this to AI, right? So when we start a customer engagement, we have this platform, right? So the Integral AI Studio is a universal platform, right? There are lots of great vertical agents that solve problems incredibly well. If 80% of the companies do it the same, you should go and grab one of those vertical agents, right? Or if you don't care about how the job is done, you just care about the output, go grab the vertical agent. Platforms like us exist for not the 80/20 for verticals, but the 20/80, where only 20% of the role is consistent. 80% is where your value is. And I'd argue most large enterprise, that's actually where their real value is. Their value is in their process, their data, their methods. Like, so those things are really key. But the way we work with customers, first and foremost, we're not just a platform. We do software plus services because we believe that the reason why 80% of these projects are failing is actually most people don't really understand AI. They don't really understand the LLM. They don't understand how to maximize. That's okay. We saw this same thing with the web in the 90s, right? We saw this same thing with cloud and open source in the 2000s, right? We've seen this story before, and it's okay, right? So we work with customers, and the first thing we do is identify those, 1 to 3 to 5 core AI workers that are the most common pain point they have today, the expense that's frustrating to them, or their biggest opportunity to add a new capability to their business, their product or service. And then, that we start with the business case and say, okay, if we were to eliminate what percentage of that function, what would that be worth to us, right? What would that be? That then gives us a framework of even how much we can spend on it. I think the second thing, though, that comes into play is be careful about then how you go and execute it. I think the earliest AI investments were hire a data scientist, hire an AI engineer, build out a massive team to go manage the data infrastructure, go pick a model, deploy that model locally, or go run it on Amazon Bedrock and start to run that expense, and then go and find your open source frameworks and start building all this stuff from scratch, and then go ahead and start constructing all the code around these workers. Okay, that is a path. That is absolutely a path to go forward on this. However, who can be successful with that? Well, who is hiring AI engineers right now? Who's hiring data scientists right now? You're competing with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Meta, like all of the most valuable companies in the world are trying to hire that same staff to do those things. So if you're a multi-billion-dollar manufacturer, here in the Midwest or in Germany, you're not going to be able to hire that staff. And so your cost basis just to create the infrastructure and the people all of a sudden might have just wiped out all of your ROI for going and building one of these things, or you never even get it done because you couldn't actually hire the staff to do it all. So I think the platform play for folks like us, our mission is to be able to enable those organizations, the organizations who are going to be able to hire maybe some of those AI engineers, but they're going to put them on bigger core problems. They just need a platform that works, right? And so, I think there's going to be a bigger and bigger role for these things, just like we saw in software. Like for those who've been in software for a while, I liken what we're doing with our no-code platform to similar of like what happened with content management systems and e-commerce platforms, or some of these other systems we now just buy off the shelf. Back in the in the early days of the internet, you coded every storefront from scratch. You coded every application from scratch. Now we pick and choose pieces, right? And we have platforms that we build on. And so I think the ROI is there, but the ROI requires not just, is the business case good on the automation side? It's, well, what method are you taking to build it? And is that efficient? Is it effective? Are you actually increasing your cost and adding tech debt, or are you actually truly delegating this thing to Silicon?
Yeah. And I think, just for, of course, for everyone else, like you and I were talking about this yesterday, is the idea of when, like, let's say, go on YouTube right now and we type in like how to make AI agents. And for the most part, it's like easiest way to make AI agents. But then you go into the video and it's all coding. And it's like, how do I actually do that? So
Yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree. This is kind of where I think we get to the brass tacks of, the future, the actual, into the actual future of where we're seeing this. Where do you actually see AI agents, and let's just say, or AI workers, agentic AI, whatever we want to call it, in the next 5 years?
It's a great question. I know there's, if you pay attention to the press, I feel like a lot of the conversations about AI is all about the LLM and when are we going to have AGI. And I almost feel like it's kind of a smokescreen, and it's kind of nonsense, because I think we have maybe tapped 5-10% of the potential of the LLMs that we currently have. So like I've been in this a while. I started building out AI agents now 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, right? To accomplish specific tasks when we were focused on the software development use case. And we would have these like aha moments every time we'd add new context or adjust the prompt and add good data for coaching, right? And there's such a different mental model for constructing an AI agent than writing software. Because most of us who are focused on this problem now, I'd be surprised. We've got a ton of people on the live stream right now. I'd be surprised if there wasn't a majority of them who actually have been in software development for some portion of, maybe not writing software, but they've been in software development for what they're doing. All the early adopters of AI are the ones who've been in software development. But I sat in rooms full of senior executives, CIOs, CTOs, heads of engineering, all those folks, and talked to them about this stuff. And they keep thinking that it's deterministic software, right? And not realizing prompting an LLM is like coaching a person, right? If you look at the really thoughtful prompts that are built into the agents that are highly effective, and you read them, it reads like you're coaching an employee. It reads like you're coaching a person. And then context awareness comes in. And context awareness is way more important than actually most people, I think, understand. It's not about the power of the LLM. I'll give you a staggering statistic from the software development world. When I was at Tabnine, we created a code generation agent. So literally just give it instructions, tell it what you want. It'll write. Even now, it'll even take a Jira ticket and just write a full application. And in that code generation, we would track the acceptance rate. So based on what you asked for, what you got back, did you accept the code? Did you edit the code? Did you just flat out reject the code and try again? And what's really interesting is moving between LLMs. So going from GPT 3.5 to GPT 4.0 on the same exact prompts, same exact structure, we saw high single digit to low teens jumps in acceptance rate of what the AI was generating. So pretty solid. Like that's a pretty solid increase to go from model generations. We, in the early days, started feeding it the context of your existing code. So instead of just saying, well, write this function, and here's other functions that are like it. Here's other code you wrote that is very similar. The acceptance rate, just with what we call local code awareness, so code in the files you were already working with and related to that project, jumped 40%. 40%. And what we discovered was, as we started adding the right context, we saw similar jumps in almost every use case. So like test generation, if we gave you pre-existing tests, same thing, 40, 50, 60% jumps in acceptance rate. Then we added global code awareness, like all of a sudden these big things. And what was remarkable to me about that was not just like, okay, context really matters, which was remarkable to me. But the other thing was like, everybody's talking about the damn LLM and no one's talking about the requirements here. But then you think about it as a human. If I were going and asking you to do a task, I can't just ask you to do the task. I have to give you the context necessary for you to be successful in the task. I want you to do this, but I want you to do it in this way. And I want it to follow these parameters. And I want it to meet these expectations. Then you're successful. We're only learning how to do this right now, really. And when I see agents that other people have constructed and look at, and they have no context, and it's just the LLM and it hallucinates, and you're like, wow, you haven't figured it out at all. Like you have not figured, you calling that an agent, but it's not. It's just some packaged prompts, right? So I think where we go from here is we're going to start unpacking and learning these things, and we're going to create more and more complex agents capable of doing more things, particularly as businesses, as we get better about exposing the agents to the most relevant corporate context. And I think this is a really critical point. As I meet with senior executives, particularly technical people who really understand this stuff, they say, actually, the biggest issue for AI agent adoption right now is the curation of data relevant to the job, right? So I have to be able to point that agent to the most relevant information. Look, this is why I'm not concerned when I hear about like Workday and Salesforce and all these guys building their own agent farms, because the narrowcast, it'll know what it knows in those systems. But the agents that are going to be most powerful for us as businesses, they're smart like an employee is smart, right? You want your employee of the month. The employee of the month knows that to solve this task, I need to go to Office 365 for this. I need to go to Jira for this. I need to go into my knowledge base for this. I actually have this other ticketing system over here that is information, and I'm going to use all of that as both context and actions to complete tasks. So fast forward 5 years from today, we've got, for every employee, we probably have 10, 20, 50 AI workers who are completing these tasks for us. They are incredibly well informed. They're connected to all of your systems. And we've been able to put in the constraints and the coaching that means we can trust them to complete the task because they are operating within our parameters. And what that means then for us as individuals is we will be focused more on the transformational problems. We'll be focused more on the creative process. And then frankly, as businesses, where we're going to differentiate is process, data, method, the methodologies and how we solve things, those sort of things that used to be the differentiators, right? If you go back 20, 30 years, what differentiated a business, many times was the method, the approach, the capability, the intelligence of the organization. For a long time, it just meant who could ship software faster. That's who won, right? I think we're going to reset more to that in the next decade.
Man, that so many parts of that I feel like answer the true thoughts that people are having as well. And the idea of like, me in marketing and also kind of my background in learning and development goes back to like, when we're talking about, other agents and stuff that are not providing context. In our case, on our platform, we can actually set the system prompts to actually teach everything to the LLM that we want it to know. And that it goes back to the idea of people are like, oh my gosh, well, agents are just going to take my job, and be like, there is so much that you as the actual kind of person working and building or building these agents can do to set yourself apart if you start learning what it takes to build a useful and thoughtful agent through your prompting. Oh my gosh, like that's where I get so excited and so fired up. I'm like, we have the opportunity to truly, for the, just saying it out loud, be like, future proof in that kind of way, but also with you saying the future is these super intelligent agents that, we're already building now. Like if you start doing it in 2025, like you're going to be 5 years ahead of everyone else when people are just realizing, oh man, I should have been doing this in 5 years ago type of thing. Like that's crucial.
100%. I applaud everyone who joined the live stream for being curious and believing that there's a path forward and trying to learn, because that is where the winners are emerged, right? Like people forget that Amazon was started in 1995, 94 actually might even have been. But you're going to laugh, I literally still have the tumbler that Amazon sent to all of their customers, the coffee tumbler they sent to all of their customers, the Christmas of 95 as a thank you for being a customer. And you're like, that's how long they've been at it. The reason why they got so good, like the reason why AWS exists is because they basically had to solve all of the core engineering problems of building a digital experience and building a digital platform. So of course they ended up being able to resell that stuff, right? And so I think I'd encourage everyone, like you're in at the forefront right now. You're right up front. Good on you, because there's stuff we're still going to be figuring out. But fast forward 5 years from today, when everyone just accepts that AI workers are how things supposed to be, you're already going to have figured out all of these things that they don't even know the problems yet. They don't even know what they don't know. Like you've already figured most of these things out.
Yeah.
There's a comment that somebody made in the chat. I hear a lot about AI replacing humans, but the reality is that human soft skills, critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence are what make AI truly effective. I think that's right. I think our jobs, we've been in this sort of weird world, particularly because we use software so much in what we do, of we have our soft skills and our sort of core humanity that is really the thing that makes us special. And then we learn all these technical skills to sort of execute what we do. I think the reality is there's going to be a place for us 5, 10 years from now where that's where we live. Like even the prompt engineering, like you think about your marketing use case, Austin, like, yeah, actually the LLMs can write pretty good marketing copy, but you know what they need? They need a really thoughtful, thorough messaging guide, and they need examples of what you think is great work. So if you're a brand marketer and consumer, or you're a product marketer in a B2B business, guess what? Like you just have to, now your job is to build the really thoughtful messaging guide and to build those good examples, like curate those good examples, and then coach the agent to go generate the stuff you want, right? If you're in finance and you're a financial analyst or planner, and you're just trying to help your customer make good decisions around where to put their investments, you have a vision, you have a method. Well, now you can actually go and delegate the research, the analysis, and even the recommendation generation to those based on your method, right? And then you're the one who's leading that charge. So I think all of these are 100% correct. I think they're all 100% correct. I think the sooner we can start wrapping our head around, well, that's how we want to operate and how we will operate, then the more successful we're all going to be.
Beautiful. That is wonderful. I completely agree. So for the sake of time, of course, for everybody, let's jump over to Q&A. So as a quick opener, once again, for everyone, please, if you have any questions, throw them into the Q&A. That's kind of the easiest way that I can see them and Peter can see them to read them off. So if you have any questions right now, as we start answering these, feel free to throw more in there. But first question comes from Danielle right now. What about building an AI agent or for a task that our company has not? So what about building an AI agent for a task that our company has not perfected yet? How would you handle that?
That's a great question. This is once again back to the core skills you need to develop as the human in the loop building these AI agents. I think it's like any other business process design we would have done before. Work backwards from the goal, right? What are you hoping to achieve? What is the outcome you want? What is, the specific inputs and outputs that you're seeking from this? And just like you would if you were trying to hire a person to do it, a good mental model for you is write a job description for yourself. Like if you were to write a job description for that agent, what would it include? What are its qualifications? Qualifications in a job description is context, right? What is its day-to-day activities, right? Guess what? Those are the prompts. That's a great way to think about this. Like I would encourage you. This stuff comes really natural to me because early in my career, this is a lot of what I did. I did strategy, I did business process optimization, I did all this stuff as we adopted digital. But it was not rocket science. Like it was understand the inputs and outputs, understand the decisions you're trying to make, and then start to really construct what are the things it needs to know and do in order to complete those. And then that is literally sufficient to be able to actually go and start crafting an agent, right? Using a tool like Integral, our structure, and we're still obviously very early days. This product is very, very new. It's released months ago at this point, but the structure is the same. We have actions, so inputs and outputs. We have the prompts and the brain. So what is the instruction you're giving the worker? And then what brain are you using to process it? And then, we have the knowledge they need to have. So what is that RAG, context and data that you want to apply to that use case? And by the way, more is not better. More is just more. Like you have to know exactly what you want to give it as appropriate guidance. And so think about that. If you were writing a job description and you were writing, a process for someone to follow, you'd know all those same things. What are the inputs and outputs you want from them? What's the decisions they have to make? What's the context they need to do their job? If you can do that, you can drop into Integral right now and actually start constructing those workers.
Yep.
Let's go ahead. Not just in a no-code platform like ours. It does, even if you were coding this, you still have to know all those same things. So it's the same thing if you have an engineer doing it for you. First thing an AI engineer is going to ask you is all of those same questions. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that, Danielle. Just for the sake of time, let's go ahead and just with one more. And this is kind of actually on top of what we just talked about, especially adding, the idea of RAG and all that. So can you speak to, this is from Jeffrey, can you speak to the need to fine tune the LLMs for the tasks being requested of them in order to keep them from exceeding their foundational training, which is often just generalized knowledge? I know you kind of went over that, but.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say something once again that's pretty radical. You don't need to fine tune models. 99.9% of the use cases that are out there, you do not need to fine-tune models. Model fine-tuning existed for two purposes. The first purpose was when the models themselves were not trained on relevant data, right? So I'll give you actually a use case, a practical one from my history in software. So all of the public models have relied upon publicly available code bases. So you can argue whether or not it was legal or not, that they're scraping stuff that was on GitHub, and Microsoft was scraping GitHub, and people were scraping Oracle's repos, which are absolutely not open source, but the reality was they were training on what they could find publicly. So when these early LLMs started being applied to things like COBOL, didn't work at all. Just didn't work because there was no publicly trained data for that. So a lot of the model fine-tuning early on was around closing those gaps. I will tell you, for 99.9% of the agent use cases, they have been trained on the things that are relevant to complete the task. Now, what don't they know? What are the things that they actually require? That's where context comes in. And what we actually discovered was model fine-tuning is incredibly expensive and actually doesn't necessarily advance things as much as RAG and context awareness, right? Just like you probably learned everything you needed to know in school to do your job. You learned your critical thinking, you learned all that stuff. But if you didn't have access to your corporate wiki, you couldn't actually complete the task, right? We find very similar things with AI workers. Now, that is an incredibly simplistic summary. There are absolutely going to be gray areas between those two where a model does need to be fine-tuned, but those are usually very advanced use cases. I would challenge everyone who's listening to this live stream to first attempt to solve the problem with advanced leverage of knowledge and context before you even start thinking about fine-tuning. Now, there are obvious things that are also not going to fit in that. There are fine-tuned models for drug discovery and pharmaceuticals. There are fine-tuned models for machine vision for autonomous driving. Those are not what I'm talking about. Those are highly specialized skills, highly specialized capabilities. And frankly, if you're working on one of those use cases because the context does not solve the problem.
Yep, absolutely. So it's 11:59, at least where I am. Everybody, thank you so much for, we still have so many thoughtful questions. What I will say is that I would encourage you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel, kind of interact with us on LinkedIn, on social medias, where we can, obviously with these answers, like, Jeffrey and Kokilla, like all of you, we can answer you there as well, obviously, since we're out of time. And obviously we're humans. We're just like you. We want you to interact with us. We can answer you there. So please feel free to also send us a DM or shoot us an email. And of course, try out the platform for yourself at integrail.ai. Let us know what you think. Try out some of these things that Peter has talked about and let us know your feedback. We are here for you. We are customer centric. We are builder centric as well. And we want to augment your lives, make your lives better, make your lives easier, more efficient, all the above. But I just want to thank you once again. Thank you for joining us. And Peter, thank you for all of your amazing insights and all that you've brought to Integrail.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And this will become a regular thing for us around the future of work. So we think this is a critical part of some of what we're working on at Integrail. It's not just about the platform. It's about how do you adopt and adapt to AI workers in your company. So I think your questions have been phenomenal. We'll use your questions as a starting point maybe for another one of these fireside chats on a more focused topic. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
And yes, we will be sending out the recording for everyone.